So the next speaker that we're going to have is going to elaborate on what will it take to ensure an open, secure, and innovative internet for the next 25 years. Our speaker is Marc Halbfinger. Marc is the CEO of PCCW Global. He joined PCCW in 2000 as the Senior Vice President for Business Development for the Pacific Convergence Corporation. In 2001, he helped establish Beyond the Network, which later became part of PCCW Global and was appointed CEO of PCCW Global in 2007. Marc was previously Vice President at Teleglobe, in addition to having roles at Global One, Sprint International, and a Southwestern Bell subsidiary. He has spent more than 25 years in media and telecommunications roles. So please welcome Marc Halbfinger.
Thanks. Where's the clicker? Okay, thanks very much. A bit humbling, the size of the audience. Nan told me last year that there would be only about 30, 40 people here, and I don't think I've ever spoken to a room so large, so I'll do my best, and hopefully the fact that I don't come from a specifically technological background will still be of benefit. I changed the title to be Future, whereas future could be anything from a few moments from now to 25 years, because Lord knows I don't even know if I'm going to make it to the airport on time later, and we'll see if I'm able to succeed. First of all, thanks to Nan also for inviting me, to Kevin, Lori, Stan, Daniel, all the team at the MEF, and particularly to my own team here in Virginia that have come to visit to hear what's going on. They're doing a tremendous work, really yeoman's work, particularly in this space. Shachar, who's on the board of MEF, and Dave Hughes will be speaking to you, also on Vice President of Engineering, and all of them have helped contribute a little bit to the message, and hopefully I'm listening correctly to what they're saying. We'll see. Just to give a little bit of a basis for who we are and why perhaps the folks are keen to hear what happens with us in PCCW Global and why we're friendly to the MEF. Hong Kong, to some extent, some would argue, as you can see in the bottom bullet point, is a laboratory for telecommunications development. And arguably, if you wanted to try and understand what's going to happen in the future, you may want to spend a few moments in Hong Kong to see what's actually happening there today. Everyone can compete. It's uber competition, so to speak. The prices, as defined by the United Nations, are probably the lowest on a per GDP basis anywhere in the world for any type of ICT service, and the bandwidth rates that can be delivered are remarkable. Our own business, PCCW Global, is part of HKT, which is the domestic let's call it incumbent telecommunications service provider, but there is no such thing as an incumbent anymore in Hong Kong because of the vast competition. Once upon a time, we were known as Cable and Wireless HKT, and today, interestingly, I think we have been spun off HKT as a publicly traded trust. And why do I say that? Because a lot of the discussion that's going to take place in the next few days will talk about agility, about change, has to deal also underlying it all, frankly, a huge amount of capital investment. HKT is innovative, not just technologically, but also financially. By spinning off as a trust, they're able to take the depreciation out of the bottom line as far as shareholders are concerned, and to assure that dividends can be distributed from the free cash flow structure. It's a correct thought process for a telco, and something that is only now being considered in the United States, and I'm sure that you'll hear more about it. Domestically, also in Hong Kong, some would argue that our change capabilities, or the ability to understand where the MEF team is headed with the third network, the notion of combining endpoints and software agility and so on, is something that we really are doing in the local loop in the consumer environment. We take any device that you see on the top of your screen over there, and we mesh it into any network infrastructure underneath it all. But the key to all of that are the applications that are delivered in the center. They're ubiquitously delivered over any type of device, over any type of service infrastructure. Importantly to all of that is the bandwidth component. Bandwidth today is not just fixed, it's also mobile. We've sought increased revenue from increased speeds, but really not that much comparatively to other markets in the world. 1,000 gigabits today, 1,000 megabits, 1 gig to the home on fiber today, really we're delivering for less than $25 US. And in fact, the mobile devices that you see over here, we're going to, oops, sorry, that's struck out. Our mobile devices today, with the Wi-Fi capability on the right-hand side and the LTE capability, where we're moving now from 100 to 150 megabit, and by the end of 2015 we'll already be at 220 meg. in terms of an LTE-based delivery to the handset, combined with over 19,000 Wi-Fi hotspots that are fully integrated into our cellular environment in Hong Kong that will also be able to deliver up to 1 gig. The bandwidth ubiquity, whether fixed or mobile, I think is directly the message that the folks over there are trying to deliver. Inside the home, also every type of device, every type of application is what we're trying to do at the consumer level. And I think that all of these components, if you're able to get any application inside the home, we also want to assure that you're able to deliver that outside the home. And you're invited to come to Hong Kong, travel on the subway system there, and watch anyone watch TV live on the subway system in the tunnel. It's really quite a remarkable experience. Our global backbone was the first network today that at least we believe, the first network that was certified by the team for 2.0 certification. We're doing quite well also in the IP infrastructure space, and clearly we believe that this IP connectivity, the global infrastructure, together with our domestic capability in Hong Kong is important. To the concepts that they wanted me to talk about today. The network society was actually a sociologist term that was coined in the 70s by a University of Toronto professor who was talking about how digital communications would somehow impact lives and lives would shape it. They had no notion in the 70s at U of T about what would be happening in the network society with Facebook and with cellular and so on. In fact, this network society, as we see it today, we're able already to talk about the future in terms of 5G in the cellular environment, what big data analytics will be doing in cloud, what are the devices, implants, even though folks are saying that Google Glass might fall by the wayside, other types of applications and devices and so on will be making the world different, certainly. Be different in the financial sphere, we know that today, certainly in medical, we hope, transportation and every other component. Transportation, cars, trains, boats, airplanes, everything has connectivity today in every form. The only issue being the bandwidth ubiquity and also, as Nan so eloquently stated before, assuring that we would be able to get to QoS anywhere, anytime, always on. But what's happening as all of this is going on is that ecosystems of operating systems, of infrastructure and applications are actually starting to compete with one another, at least. Each one of these entities, whether it be a device manufacturer such as Samsung, who's trying to build its own competitive ecosystem to compete with Apple, who will compete with Google, who will compete with Microsoft, who will compete with service providers who may be in the room here today. All of these issues are raising new challenges. Uptime, QoS, how to migrate from network service orientations is what we as service providers with embedded infrastructure all the way to the access layer are trying to focus on. How do we move our QoS-based services from the desktop in an office or in a home over to a mobile device and still assure that quality without any of the interferences that may take place in the process? And a big component, a big message of concern for all of us, frankly, security. Security and to some extent privacy. Some would argue that there is none in today's world, but still it's necessary, if nothing else, for compliance purposes in vast organizations. To implement these new services, especially as we're moving forward in the way we have our organizations, is a challenge. We have businesses that we're running with legacy environments. How do you stop one day, take what you have in the legacy world, and move to the next step? It's wonderful for Nan and Co. to stand up here and to say, this is where we have to head to, and they're right. But how do you take all of this capital, all of this investment, all of the operations, all of the people, all of the organizations, stop here, move to here, without ruining your arrangements that you have with your management team about salaries? It's really a challenge. And so how do we move to all of these things? Because to some extent, immigration that you need to have raises expectations. Who knows, certainly here in America, how many immigrants have come here with certain expectations, only to be frustrated with the day-to-day. To some extent, that may be where we're headed in our business. How do we take all of these components, where we're headed in the cloud infrastructure, in the telco infrastructure, mobile access, put all these pieces together and assure that there's bandwidth ubiquity to make sure that everyone has an attractive and interactive UI-capable interface, to make sure that there's common IT interfaces even in your own organization, to make sure that there's interaction that's taking place from a legacy environment that allow you to move to this 3.0 structure that's being so correctly, in my mind, and eloquently discussed. We need to make sure that we're headed to some sort of integrated on-demand service delivery platform. That's the message here, but how do you go from step A to step B? And how do you make sure that it's there? In order to get to some of these billable products that you would say is tomorrow, some would say that it's today. All of this new revenue, new applications, faster deployment, reduced cost and operational complexity, all of these things are our aspiration. But how do we actually make money from it? How do we prove that the investment that we need to make in our networks actually generate these things in manner of value that shareholders will be willing to invest in? How do we go from a programmable environment to this network on demand type of structure? How do we make sure that we're going to assure the quality of service, cost, price, and policy control, and to make sure that network scalability is structured in a way that is cost effective? It's one thing to say that we're going to have drag and drop automatic provisioning from one area to another. It's quite different, and that's fine in a virtualized environment. But if in that drag and drop we also need to have inventory placed in South Africa or in Russia or in Hong Kong or in the United States, how are we going to be justifying that capital investment in a sensible way, managing, monitoring, assuring that the analytics are delivering on the value that we expect? It's a challenge. And so I asked Brett Rehard, who's here with me, a Chief Network Officer, to put together a couple of slides and say, how are we, PCCW Global, going to be taking the next steps? And they may be right, they may be wrong, and no one has the monopoly on truth, certainly not us in this room. And it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy coming to the MEF, because I think it's an unassuming organization that's really working on the bits and bytes of how to move our industry forward. And I'll have one message to that at the end. And so I asked Brett to help me out with a couple of slides and say, look, here we are. Nan spoke about it in the first couple of slides about what has to happen in the OSS BSS environment. On the IT side, the BSS side has been focused constantly on what we need to be doing in business systems, and certainly on the OSS side, the network has its own world. Increasingly, as we're moving things forward, we see this swivel chair in our own organization as software that feeds both the IT environment for BSS and the IT environment for OSS needs to integrate further, not only as we look at financial movement that has to take place from the supply-demand chain, but also from network provisioning, so that we're able to give exactly those on-demand dynamic services in the network. And even that is still very, very, very refined in a limited manner in terms of where we want to go. The aspirational level that we have in this regard is huge and significant. And so we have to go to a stage where we will start to rebuild, and we already have begun that, some of our IT systems with new architecture. The legacy development, some of our IT 20 years old or 20 years old or more, is in a structure that if we don't start to change that immediately, we'll be in a bit of a pickle, so to speak. We need to make sure that we can start to deploy an orchestration layer, exactly as has been described in the three document that some of you may have read already. And we need to make sure that we're headed first and foremost, a single next step, to assure that we can get to some self-provisioning capability of that environment. And then we want to take that self-provisioning capability that we have in our own network, and we want to make sure that we can extend that to another network. It's one thing today in an international environment if we were to develop and deploy capability just in our own network. But if we're not creating the roadmap and the rule base for interconnecting with others, we'll be left alone in this market. We're not large enough, at least in our environment. And so therefore we need to make sure that we're cooperating and collaborating. And quite frankly, if the vision that has been set forward in MEF today looks at anyone, anywhere on the globe with any service, it cannot happen with one single ecosystem. It cannot happen with one single company doing it, at least not in today's financial parameters. Therefore, it would be absolutely necessary to create the structures for e-bonding, even for pricing, for service provisioning, and ultimately for drag and drop self-provisioning, whatever it may be, and that NNI network orchestration structure is there. Once that's done, if you can integrate with one service provider, then you can certainly do it with more. You can create an environment of a federation, and we've been talking about cloud confederation between ourselves and other service providers, and even testing that, and I'll show you in just a second a little bit of a slide. Once you've built your own capability and created the environment that you can interconnect with one carrier, you can then go to the next and start to make sure that that element mushrooms. But at the same time, you need to be managing that legacy piece underneath and assuring that step by step you're getting to that environment. So why would we want to keep these IT and network sides separate? What is necessary, at least for the moment? Do we want to maintain the separation of BSS and OSS? For the moment, we are. We believe that it's important to minimize various policy changes, and to make sure that we have, on the one hand, an agile world developing and innovating and being entrepreneurial inside our own little organization. At the same time, we need to maintain policy and control for the legacy environment so that it shifts at the right time. We still need to make sure that there are demarcation points in our organization and between ourselves and partner carriers in what happens in terms of system administration, operations, engineering, and whatever the case may be. And it is important ultimately to make sure that transactions are occurring simultaneously to intelligent work in financial systems. That's very complicated sometimes for some of our legacy businesses to go. So where are we today, both in IT, in network, and in product? Currently, this is our current structure. Separate multiple systems, multiple separate POPs and platforms, as many of you are familiar with in your own networks. Some static services, rates, manual billing in some areas when we want to provide some dynamic capability. But in the short run, and I'm saying within the next 12 months, we're headed to that middle column, although the migration to MPLS-TP will obviously take some time as we move forward. But we are headed to a short-run view of on-demand next services and the ability to deliver with almost immediate capability, immediacy being determined in terms of what are the types of services that we can automatically and dynamically provision, as opposed to those which still require some inventory and provisioning capability, which is a little bit different. In the long run, though, that last column, and I don't believe this is 20 or 25 years. I think the long run is much shorter than that, obviously. We do want to get to full automation. We want to do that through an NNI arrangement with other service providers. And we certainly want to make sure that what we're able to provide on our network is not just competing with others, but actually servicing other service providers so that we create a uniform, if you will, type of ecosystem that's not us competing with one another, but a platform for various companies to collaborate, service providers certainly. Ubiquitous customer portals. It's important that the UI that a customer feels is going to be integrative, intelligent, and to be able to deliver all of the qualities. It has to be, if you will, a bit sexy in order to deliver on the orchestration services automation value proposition that would be provided. We need the virtualization and the abstraction layers to feed into our physical networks, exactly as defined in the 3.0 document. We need to make sure that the BSS OSS increasingly integrate with one another in a sensible way while maintaining where we need to go. And then you move over to that left side of the screen and you can see, you can see that we're moving to a centralized, federated orchestration system, perhaps with other service providers, hopefully like-minded players, and to assure that we're then able to integrate through that confederation to the BSS and OSS environments of the other operators. That will be the complexity, certainly. Earlier this year, we took part in what's called the Pacific Partners Meeting. It's actually a structure that is facilitated by AT&T. 3 initiatives were structured over there. One was direct integration through APIs. Second, federated cloud and NNIs, or federated clouds on top of NNIs. And last, importantly, SDH-based automated cable capacity provisioning from one network across to another. We were partners inside the PPM, inside the Pacific Partners Meeting, which is different carriers, different service providers, and it's really AT&T plus many Asian service providers, national carriers mostly, ourselves, PLDT in the Philippines, Telstra in Australia, Tata, Telecom Malaysia, and so on, a few more. And we focused on doing these 3 elements. Can these be tested? Can these be done? And we did go through a proof of concept with live provisioning, basically opening up our own IT environment for e-bonding, for pricing, for service ordering, provisioning. And we even got to the point where we were able to demonstrate clear video delivery and automatic spawning of servers in different territories across a different network, from Hong Kong to the Philippines, in a different environment, automated, live, real-time, enabled to see. In my view, the work that was done there was dramatic. We now have to make sure that we're getting to common technical standards for the API environments. And here's a critical piece. The wholesale interconnection and commercial settlement mode needs to be established. All of the discussions that we're talking about here at the technical operational level, if we're not going to work through a clear wholesale operational environment between carriers, many of the thought processes, the ambitions that are expressed here over the next few days may fall prey to simply the inability to commercially monetize the ideas that are set around the table. And I do believe that it's quite important, similar to what the GSMA did some 25, 30 years ago, which was to set forward the parameters for roaming. They were financial parameters. Those financial parameters helped seed a dramatically important industry in our business. Subtext: if we're not going to focus on the international wholesale commercial models associated with the concepts that MEF has put forward, we may have a problem, and that, I would say, is important. I would highlight that Phoenix and Sienna were very critical in helping us put together these proposals, and so that's a little bit of a commercial for them. So, 3.0 or 10.0? I don't know if it'll take 25 years or 20 months. Who knows? Because every couple of months there's another number coming out. I do think it's somewhat moderately helpful that telco service providers, who are used to always making sure that the gear that goes in the network is perfect and established and tested over and over again, start to think a little bit towards the software guys who have no fear to throw something out there that's flawed, build a forum around it and say, hey, customer, help me fix it. It would be nice, once and for all, that the software guys would move a little bit more towards the network guys, and the network guys would move a little bit more towards the software guys in that regard. In any event, in order to make sure that we're moving forward on an open, secure environment for the future, 3.0 to 10.0 to 20.0 over the next X number of years, and again, I'm no prophet, I would say that we need to get everybody on this train. The train that is defined in the statement document that was put forward to those of you who took the time to read it is quite reasonably thought through. But I would argue that we need to get some of the players who are seen perhaps outside of this environment at the moment, and these are the retail mobile service providers. The large ICPs, the Baidus, the Googles, the Amazons of the world need to also be partaking in this structure. At the end of the day, if they'll want their service delivered to any device and we want to interconnect at the clouds that they're going to have, there's going to have to be a dialogue that makes sense even between them. And vendors. Vendors are so keen always to make sure that somehow there's a structure that's delivered to their environment. I think it is quite critical to make sure that at least the base, as Bob was saying earlier, the base of interoperability, which Ethernet was the promise for, as we move over to these next components, which are somewhat software-based, we run the risk of not assuring the interoperability structure. And the software and network software guys and the network guys need to start to feel comfortable with us. If SDN is more than software-defined network and more of a services-defined network, frankly, it's a bit of a marriage. And in a marriage, it takes time to get comfortable with one another. And it's important to make sure that these things start to get even more so. Security is absolutely critical. Organizations today, most telcos, as we're seeing the changes in faces, and we have it in our own environment, are going through such dramatic change, constant org changes, and certainly the larger ones, it's hard to keep track. The people in this room who understand where this is headed really have to be evangelists in their own organization to challenge organizations to adopt the change, to challenge whatever organizational infrastructure takes place, usually for commercial reasons, will be fed with the technological drive that these opportunities, such as agility in the NFV and SDN environment, provide to the fixed networks. And the fixed networks won't go away because the virtual stuff can't live without them. How to integrate them is the mission statement. How to evangelize that in your own organizations is critical. Wholesale and retail commercial interaction. Once upon a time, it was the dog wagging the tail. Sometimes I think today that retail, wholesale, they're not in sync. Actually, interconnected networks, confederated clouds with a clearly defined wholesale commercial model will help generate thought processes for variable-based traffic in a retail environment. Having the retail and wholesale organizations talking to each other is a critical step in any service provider organization. When I service provider, I don't just mean carrier. It's a mobile operator, it can be an ICP, it can be whatever the case. But if there is no dialogue at the wholesale level between us that makes sense, and then inside your own organization, between the wholesale environment and the retail environment, again, you'll hit an organizational roadblock, which won't allow the drive and the facilitation of these services. Standards, you said that standards stand will be discussed on Wednesday, and I would argue that the more specific the standards become, that's all very exciting. But if you want to facilitate change, please make sure that the standards are clear frameworks. that allow the flexibility of change, that are assuring the base components of interoperability, but don't lock you down to one or another. Don't get into the stick fight about this or that. Assure that the framework is making sense for all of us to interoperate and move forward. Change is moving faster, and so I encourage all of you to get on the train, because I think that the MEF, quite frankly, in a very unassuming way, perhaps with a misnomer in terms of the title of its own organization, is really moving us in the correct direction. And that's why my team has been very friendly to this environment, because we think this is really headed in the right way. We encourage all of you to get on that train, but as my picture shows, it's no longer a locomotive. The change is moving fast. The train is a picture of a bullet train from Beijing to Shanghai. That's how fast things are moving, perhaps faster. And I hope that all of us can do it together. Thanks very much.